Mellow greetings, everyone. Here we are once again. Now, as some of you might recall, last year around this time, I did a series of reviews around games and one horrible movie based off of the Digimon franchise, one of my personal favorite children's franchises of all time. So, with all of the material that is surrounding the mythos of Digimon, I decided to turn this into a bit of a yearly tradition, and this year we're going to take a look at 3 more games based off of the franchise. And before we get into the meat of this review, I feel I also need to talk to you a little bit about genres. When a series or franchise really starts to take off in gaming, it's usually because they find a certain genre that they are really comfortable with. Using Mario as the archetypal example here, he started out as a platform star, and many of his best games and his high-profile games all happen to be platformers. And even his earliest games, the ones which were still featured in the arcade, still laid the groundwork for what would become the scrolling platformer games. Of course, since his inception, Mario has branched out into other genres, as a successful franchise is often wont to do, usually with mixed results. Mario has been in puzzle games, racing games, sports games, and even fighting games. God help us if they ever make a Super Mario Bros. First-person shooter. Now, of course, all of these changes in genre are pretty big risks, even for an established franchise, and they can be very hit or miss. Heck, even Mario's contributions to the educational genre have been extraordinarily lackluster. But then again, there isn't much that could make educational games entertaining to begin with. We have a very similar situation here with the Digimon franchise, as with most franchises, though this one is particularly interesting because it is a license. Now, since Digimon is based off of a Tamagotchi keychain battle toy, it does make sense to assume that it would translate well into RPG form, and it has many times before. A majority of Digimon games are actually RPGs, be they action-oriented or the more traditional turn-based types. But just like every other franchise in gaming, Digimon is certainly not limited to RPGs, and they have branched out several times into other genres, for better or for worse. Now, today's subject is a good example of how Digimon has managed to move away from its comfort zone. Today we're taking a look at
Digimon Rumble Arena!
Yes, thank you, Guillemon. Yes, it's Digimon Rumble Arena for the original PlayStation, and unlike many of the other Digimon games that were released around this time, this one is actually kind of special in that it's actually using the license from the first 3 seasons of the Digimon TV show. The game is a 3D fighter taking place on a 2D frame, and uses several characters from the first 3 seasons of the show, as I have mentioned. Now, the story to this particular game is... Excuse me for a minute, I need to go look this up. Okay, so, the story. There is no story. That was easy. I'm not even trying to be funny when I say that either. There literally is no story to this game. No cohesive way that they try to bring the adventure and Tamers universes together, but I really can't say that I mind because the gameplay in this game is so much fun. The game was made on an admittedly very small budget and is an extraordinarily simplistic fighter, especially when put up against greats like Street Fighter or Tekken, but in that way it's actually very similar to the Super Smash Bros. Game, the original at least, in that its simplicity is part of the fun factor. The game's control scheme, admittedly, is extraordinarily simplified. You have a jump button, where each Digimon is capable of double jumping, a basic attack button, which will do different attacks depending on which way you face the control stick, and you also have 2 special attack buttons, one that will perform a long-ranged attack, and one for short-range. And I do have to admit, it's very cool to see the Digimon using their signature techniques in 3D. It has that really nice pick-up-and-play sort of feel to the control, where anybody of any skill level can really pick up this game and play it without really feeling overwhelmed by having to remember dozens of combos and things like that, because there really aren't that many combos. With a simplified attack scheme, you don't really have to worry about getting chained all the time, and most of the combos come from the special attacks. Now, of course, the main gimmick in any Digimon game is how they utilize the Digivolution factor. And I have to admit, as much as I think it's handled really well in this game, I do also think that it's one of the game's missteps, which I'll get into when I get to the character selection that you have. Digivolving in this game is handled simply by a power-up bar. As you fight your opponent, a small blue bar above your health bar will start to fill up. And once it reaches full, you just tap the L1 button, and your Digimon will digivolve to whatever was the highest level they managed to reach in the cartoon. And gameplay will pause for a second, and when that happens, you get to sit through a Digivolution technique. Admittedly, it is kind of annoying watching the same thing over and over again, but hey, it happened in the show, and I didn't mind it there. Now, while one would initially assume this would lead to a lot of unfair fighting, it's actually very well balanced. Most Digimon will end up getting their Digivolution gauges full at exactly the same time, since you get about as much for getting hit as you do for landing attacks, meaning that both Digimon will most likely reach their first Digivolution at the same time, and a rookie can actually hold their own against a champion, Ultimate, or Mega. Plus, there are also some items and stage hazards that you can take advantage of that help out quite a bit as well. And if you do find yourself in a situation where it's a rookie fighting a Mega for an extended period of time, you don't really need to worry because their power is not overwhelming unless you decide to use their ultimate attack, which is tricky to pull off and is probably one of the hardest parts of the game. Actually, I take that back. The hardest part about this game is the cheap-ass end boss, Reapermon, who has such an insane advantage over you, it's not even funny. I mean, yes, it kind of fits considering that this is a PlayStation 1 fighting game, and there are always overpowering bosses in these fighting games, but still, I just cannot understand why he has such a huge advantage. So all in all, the fighting system of the game is very well handled, and the Digivolution system is very fair. Though it still is kind of funny when you see a Mega get their ass handed to them by a rookie Digimon. Trust me, it happens more often than you would think in this game. And the Digivolutions don't last forever. You will eventually go back down to your base form. And speaking of forms, I guess we also do have to address the characters, which is one area where this game sort of falls flat. In terms of character selection, you only really get the more famous Digimon from the first 3 seasons. There are no characters like Tentomon or Gomamon that you can play as. Instead, it's Agumon, Renamon, Patamon, and so forth. And the unlockable characters are mostly made up of evolved forms of those characters, allowing you to use their Mega forms in battle without having to first Digivolve.